Дорогие друзья, добрый день.
Good afternoon, dear friends. I'm glad to see all of you here. Before we start our session, let us check whether all of you have these things for voting, this, sweet buttons, right? Yeah. Be sure that you have this thing. I will tell you later how to use this. And another thing to check, if you need the interpretation, please be sure that you have the equipment for simultaneous interpretation. It's quite important for us to understand each other today, so don't forget to take this. There will be many unexpected foreign words here today, but the most important here is crowdsourcing. For some of you, it might be unknown, it might be even scary, but if I interpret it into Russian, you'll probably be even more scared. This is the resource of the crowd, For most of the people, for the majority of the people, the crowd is something gray, that it's very, some mass, that it's impossible to handle, something scary again. But if just for one moment we stop and think and understand that the crowd is still made from people, and each of them has a certain experience, has certain knowledge about every little thing. And well, if we use this correctly, we can use this as a wonderful tool, to solve some problems. And this crowd, or rather this gathering of separate persons, can be managed. And the brightest example of crowdsourcing is Wikipedia. Please raise your hand, the ones who used Wikipedia just once at least. Almost all of you here to the left of me, people who do not trust Wikipedia, I see, but still this is the best example and the most famous example of crowdsourcing. Those are the people who like to share their knowledge, to share their experience. Of course, there are some people who are managing this thing. They manage the articles, and if it's bad, they reject it. Well, but still, this is how it works. There are many examples of crowdsourcing, and some of them we can even find in this ancient history of Russian Federation. I believe we will have a lot of examples here today from different countries. But the question arises, the obvious question, how do we use the resource of the crowd to make the city a better place to live, to improve this urban, space? How can we use the artistic potential of the people to improve something, the people who make this technology possible? How do we use these possibilities? And how do we start crowdsourcing projects in Russia? What do we need to do that? What projects already exist, and how are they developing? I'm sure these are questions that we will answer during our today's session, and let me introduce our speakers today. So, first one, Professor of Journalism at Northeastern University in Boston, originator of the term crowdsourcing itself, author of Crowdsourcing, Why the Power of the Crowd is Driving the Future of Business. Jeff Howe, please. And as Jeff is saying himself, he didn't like the crowdsourcing word at the very beginning, and he really perceived it as a joke long ago. The co-founder and CPO of Crowdsourcing company, Nick Wright. Please welcome. They develop crowdsourcing platform, and they are implementing crowdsourcing project on the basis of that platform. Nick Wright, please. This is how crowdsourcing serves business already, Another speaker, Deputy Director at the Brown Institute for Media Innovation at Stanford University, Tanya Aitamurto. She's been working on Finnish, piece of legislation that was about usage of crowdsourcing, and this is an example of how we use this tool to solve some state issues. Head of the Moscow Center Open Government, Natalia Klimova. Natalia will be kind enough to share with us her experience of using crowdsourcing in Moscow authorities, and another speaker, President of the Public Opinion Foundation, Alexander Oslon. My name is Fyodor Balandin. I will be moderating this very wonderful event today. Well, so what shall we continue with? First, I would like to put the first question on voting. Before I tell you the question itself, please have a look that there is a green button which says yes, please push it. It's necessary to activate the system. Do you see red LEDs there? If yes, then it's good. We will need the buttons with the figures 1, 2, and 3. We will gonna have some questions that have 3 versions of reply and 2 so different. So the first question for your voting: how should urban development issues be resolved? And we have 3 different answers. First, by the authorities independently. Second, by the authorities with the involvement of experts. And third, with the help of residents. The answer that is correct, in your opinion, corresponds to the figure. Please push that figure. The answer can be only 1. We're not discussing this right now. We can probably pay attention to that during the Q&A session. Now we have 5 minutes to do the voting. So you see it happening in real time, how our percentaging is changing. I'm sorry, the interpretation of the questions from the audience is impossible because there is no mic. Yes, but the opinion of the residents is very important. That is the key factor here. All right, the voting is over. It's 49 and 49. We have kind of interesting... Is the result correct? Our technical staff, can you assure us that it's okay? Well, okay, let's let's count. Let's believe that this is true. Probably a little bit statistical error, but still, it's true. But you know, just I would like to know that the majority of the people here at the audience answered that the urban development issues have to be resolved by the authorities with the involvement of experts, and the second half of them that with the help of residents. And obviously, not many people believe, but that the authorities have to do that independently. We're gonna have different other votings. We're gonna have Q&A sessions. Before I give the floor to the first speaker, a couple of words about the schedule, the reglement. We have quite a tough agenda. We have 10 minutes for every speaker, and I'll be really tough at this question with you. Sorry about that. We have also special time for Q&A. We will do our best to finish at 5 p.m. as we planned, just for you to have some, you know, possibility to have a snack before the plenary session. So, dear friends, let me introduce our first speaker, Jeff Howe. Please, the floor is yours, Jeff.
Hello. So thank you very much for having me. I was really excited about this. I was here 3 years ago for a Sberbank event with the Russian federal government to sort of launch crowdsourcing. And I don't know, but I think previous to that, crowdsourcing wasn't a thing in Russia, really. And then suddenly it was, or I'm anxious to hear. I feel like I'm coming back now 3 years later, almost to the day, and I get to find out how it's doing. And it seems like some very exciting things are happening. I'll quickly give you just a little bit of insight into the genesis of that term, crowdsourcing. Because it gives you some idea of how it initially came into being and how it's been used and how it's at least was originally intended to be used. It happened during my sort of my rock and roll year as a journalist. I had been covering music for Wired magazine, a U.S. technology magazine, and specifically writing about the ways in which technology was disrupting the music industry. And what I noticed, I spent this whole summer sort of following around these rock bands, and what I'd noticed is that this was all, this one big community. The bassist in one band was doing video for another band, and the singer was also publishing books of poetry, and they all seemed to know how to do web design. And I realized that they had an entirely different relationship with technology than someone of my great advanced age. I'm kidding, but I'm 44, but a good 20 years older than they were. These were, I was a bit younger then, but these were like 17, 18-year-old kids. And there was a lot of talk at that time of user-generated content. It was 2005. MySpace was just starting to take off. But everyone seemed to think that it was this silly, trivial little thing, like it'll all be cat videos forever and ever, but we can go on with our businesses just the way we always have, and no one's going to get laid off, and it doesn't pose an actual real threat the way, say, outsourcing does. But I looked and I said, no, this is going to have nothing to do with content. This is going to, Google had just released SketchUp, which essentially was like AutoCAD. That's what architects use and industrial designers use to design three-dimensional objects. And suddenly there was, when I had been first entering the industry, AutoCAD was like $100,000 for a single desk, and it was its own system, and it was an extraordinarily exclusive thing that only a professional firm would ever have. SketchUp was free, or it was $79 for the premium version. So I thought, this is going to happen in architecture, it's going to happen in film, and I sort of crossed my fingers that it wouldn't happen in journalism, although that indeed has happened as well. So in 2006, I published this article, The Rise of Crowdsourcing, that put forth both the idea that this was happening and labeled it, gave a name to it, and also tried a bit to frame what this might be, this phenomenon that at the time was just emerging, and what it was going to mean, which was that it would have a lot of great promise, and that it would have a lot of peril, that it would be a threat to industries and people. And a couple of years later, I wrote and published a book on it, which is available at a bookstore near you. I'm kidding again, but I actually probably isn't available anymore. I don't know. I'm still here. It's been 3 years. And in those first heady, sort of glorious days, there was a lot of optimism about what crowdsourcing could do, and the promise of it, which is profound. I mean, there's something deeply democratic about the idea of crowdsourcing, and to that extent, I think it's no accident that. Maybe it's I'm from a part of the United States, Ohio, where we're very optimistic people, and we tend to think well of everyone. We tend to believe that everyone is intelligent and has something to offer, and is simply a friend you haven't met. And even though I've been a New Yorker and now a Bostonian for over 20 years, I think I still have a part of me in that. And I think when crowdsourcing works, it shows that there's truth to that. That everyone is good at something, that everyone has an insight to offer that will help everyone else. But in those early days, but mostly what happened is we tried very well-meaning, and by we I mean everyone, Americans at least. Those are the projects I know best. And sort of failed miserably. Or I call them beautiful failures or productive failures, because in that sense that your mistakes are always more valuable to you than your successes, because we learned a lot. But so an example would be in 2008, Obama, whose 2008 election had been very much a product of crowdfunding, in that very small contributions gave him more money than any president had ever had access to before. It was an extremely well-funded campaign, and most of it, I mean, some of it was corporate giving, but a lot of it was $5 here, $10 there. And so he was a proponent of crowdsourcing, and so his first press conference was the first crowdsourced press conference, and they used a very rudimentary polling tool called Google Moderator, which I think now is Google Forms, and the idea was that it was very, very ambitious, which is what I'm going to talk about for the next 10 minutes. Does an ambitious crowdsourcing project serve us well? And this was because essentially he was asking asking Americans to determine what are the priorities. That's what a press conference is. And why should we, the media, why should journalists determine what a country's priorities? What are the most important questions to ask of your leader when the public can do it? So the public had 1 week to suggest and then vote on which questions were important. And what happened is I don't know if anyone in this room knows NORML. It's the National Organization for Marijuana Legalization. They sent out an email to all their followers, and they said, go and swamp the polls. Because the fact is you can vote as many times as you want if you just, do a little trick with your computer. And so in every category that the White House had sort of naively and earnestly set up, Veterans Affairs, healthcare, foreign policy, every question that got voted to the top was, do you not think that veterans would be better served if marijuana was legalized and freely available? Healthcare. Don't you think that given marijuana's benefits to cancer patients, that marijuana should be, so, it was outside of him, Obama, the president, referencing it as a joke in his press conference, it was not used, and that was the last we saw of crowdsourcing. And I think for those of us who followed it closely, there was a lesson there, which is that the architecture has to be very, very intelligent. For today, I want to propose just a rudimentary taxonomy or distinction in two very different ways, crowdsourcing and in governance, or crowdsourcing as a way of interacting with authorities can be structured. Do I have to point this somewhere? It is on.
Давайте помогу.
Oh, it did? Okay. Citizens Vote, Crowds Act, a brief overview of crowdsourcing in government. So first, the crowd has eyes, by which I mean that just by virtue of existing, a citizen is generating something valuable, and that's data. And a citizen can take it one step further and actually actively submit that data. So this is the very simple form of crowdsourcing, and I'll give away the big surprise ending. It's the one that I think actually works, or at least works best. And see-click-fix is my favorite example, and I'll go into some depth about that. The second example is, but they also have brains. And this is the more ambitious, and in some ways the more noble idea behind crowdsourcing is that, and that's that people, that citizens aren't just good at identifying problems, but they should be used to help solve those problems as well. And an example is a project at the city of LA, I think it's the City Innovation Lab, where they have a complex, multi-phase plan in which problems will be identified, and then a whole sort of a solution architecture will be designed, and then people will gather into teams based on their expertise to try and solve these problems. And I should say the jury's out on whether or not that is working. So I don't mean to cast that as an example of a failure, but it is sort of the opposite of see-click-fix. So I love see-click-fix because it sort of contains a lot of what I think is sort of brilliant in how crowdsourcing can work in governance. It has a very simple beginning. A man named Chris Berkowitz was a 28-year-old computer programmer living in New Haven, Connecticut. That's where Yale University is based. And there was someone had sprayed. Parts of New Haven are not. There's high crime and they're not pretty to look at necessarily. There had been graffiti on his neighbor's wall, and he was continuously calling the city government and saying, "Can someone just come and remove this graffiti?" And he was complaining to friends that it never worked, and sort of saying, I wish there was, if I could just put this up on a website being like, "Hey, idiots, come take the graffiti off. I've called you 16 times." Because there was no transparency. There was no way for him to communicate to the other citizens of the city, the government's ignoring me right now. he could go out and carry a sign, but no one wants to look like, a Fruit Loop. I don't think that translates into Russian, Fruit Loop. And so instead, he built something that was very, very simple. And this is something we see in crowdsourcing again and again. The innovation isn't technological. It's the idea. The idea is what is innovative. And his idea was create a website, and then when people wrote in to complain, it would automatically route its way to the appropriate city government. All of this is public information. I would imagine, I'm surely in Moscow just as much as it is in New Haven. And that crucially, not just that, but that the complaint would be posted on the site. So this is something that the government, which actually had a similar operation that they had launched on their own website, but this is a crucial thing that they left out, which is that there was no transparency or accountability. And so this explodes. It totally takes off. And 6 years later, I'm trying to get the stats, there are 350,000 users. 700,000 issues have been reported, and 170 cities use this. So see-click-fix think of it as sort of like the front end or the interface between. 2 minutes. It has not been 13 minutes, really. All right, we're going to dash through a bunch of slides really fast. And so what see-click-fix shows is that these very simple ideas. The city is the crowd is not going to fix its own pothole. The city can do that. But what the crowd is really good at, even all these Yale PhDs, they don't need them to think. They just need their data. They just need them to say, this thing exists, and to build consensus around it. So why does this work? And honestly, if we have to leave off here, you guys haven't missed that much. One is that it's simple to use, that it lacks this great ambition that President Obama had, and that honestly, I've run my own crowdsourcing projects that have been equally ambitious. Two, that it presumes good faith on both parts. See-click-fix has a function in which users are encouraged to click a Say Thanks button, which automatically routes an email saying like, hey, thank you so much for solving my problem, to the government official that was in charge of that. I mean, I don't know about Russia, but how many times do you think government officials get patted on the back by citizens saying, I'm so glad that you're a bureaucrat and you exist? That's an unusual thing for them. And it also presumes good faith on the part of citizens, that they genuinely want to work with their government, and that they believe that their problems will be solved. The third thing, and this is different as far as I know from most of the crowdsourcing projects in Moscow right now, is that it's always on. It's very hard to build participation really quickly for a one-month project, which is how a lot of these projects are in the US as well. This idea that if we build it, they'll come. It's not the Super Bowl, man. I mean, people aren't going to just like flock in to take part of some process that they don't get anything out of. It takes patience. It took 6 years of always being on for see-click-fix to build this giant user base and to become the success that it is. And then, really importantly, I've mentioned transparency, is an idea, and I don't know if this translates, gamification. It's the idea that people respond to incentives that don't necessarily have anything to do with money. So what see-click-fix uses are called civic points. And believe it or not, people will bend over backwards to accrue more civic points than anyone else, just like they would in a video game. You can't buy a car with your civic points. You can't pay the rent. You do nothing at all except brag that you have them, but that is enough to incentivize people. In fact, in a lot of studies around crowdsourcing, offering them money is less incentive because they feel insulted. Unless you're going to offer them, $30,000, it's, it's better to rely on their good faith and their goodwill. And last thing is something that Chris Berkowitz said, which I thought was brilliant and really could be applied to crowdsourcing and governance, in any country, which is, he says that potholes are the gateway drug of civic engagement. And that's gateway drugs an American thing, but, back in the Ronald Reagan war on drugs, but marijuana was talked about as the gateway drug. If you smoked marijuana, you would wind up doing all these harder things that would kill you. The idea being that this stat alone will sort of tell it. Use on see-click fix spikes in the spring. And Russia, Moscow being quite a cold city, will understand why, right? Like, why would that happen? Because all the potholes form. It thaws, that when ice thaws, the roads get torn up, and that's when people really care. That's when they want their government to take action. But what happens is, if you tell the government about a pothole and the government actually fixes it, and I know there are government people in the room, they have to fix it. If you don't fix it, forget about it. That person is never coming back, ever. They tried, and it failed. But fix it, and they're yours for life, because they know that government works for them. And that's it, and I'll pass it, but thank you very much.
Спасибо, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. You are almost perfect on time. And now I give floor to Nick Wright, the co-founder of Crowdsourcing. Nick, please.
Is my mic working? Is it working now? Is that better? Great. Okay, fantastic. I would have quite happily given up some of my time to listen to you talk some more, Jeff. What I want to sort of talk about Crowdsourcing, what we do, we're sort of we're working with lots of organizations, lots of businesses, lots of governments all around the world. And we've got a crowdsourcing tool, a crowdsourcing platform, which these organizations have adopted. And what I want to do today is just talk a little bit about our journey, some of the things that we've kind of experienced from actually being on the ground doing these kind of projects, usually for the first time. And also just want to sort of share with you, I think, just some of the sort of stuff that's happening elsewhere, just so you can sort of get inspired, and hopefully, it will sort of get you thinking about how it can be applied in your cities and your municipals. I think what's true is that we are living technologically in probably the most exciting and fast-paced period in the whole of human history. Technology is giving people all around the world new ways to shape and control their own destiny. What the internet has done effectively is it's made the whole process of collaboration a social one. And mass collaboration or crowdsourcing is actually becoming by far and away second nature for most people. Today, through social channels like, particularly in the UK and the US, Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and things like this, effectively hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people can connect and collaborate, in ways that they've never before in the whole of human history been able to. But what we believe at Crowdsourcing is really this is the tip of the iceberg. So this isn't kind of the end. This is really just the beginning of what is going to happen and the real opportunity that kind of presents itself for the technology. I think what's more profound is, and certainly of more of interest to us at Crowdsourcing, is the impact that this technology is beginning to exert on the role of government and business. The collective benefit of sort of sharing human knowledge and creativity is growing at a hugely exceptional rate, and governments and citizens and companies will actually make technology increasingly more of the solution to the problems that they face. And we believe that actually the vast majority of the world will be the net beneficiaries of connectivity. So improving greater efficiency and opportunities to basically improve the quality of our lives. Really what we're sort of seeing is that actually crowdsourcing has got the power to strengthen the relationships between governments and people. This is what we're finding on the ground with the projects that we're working on. And at Crowdicity, what we're seeing is firsthand an ever-growing number of organizations and governments that are dramatically magnifying their sort of capability to solve problems quicker, more efficiently than ever before by tapping into the power of the crowd to basically crowdsource new ideas, to actually understand the problems more, and actually to drive more efficient solutions that actually land into the markets that they're intended for much more effortlessly and with much less friction. What I want to do is just share with you now, so I've sort of given you a bit of the sort of backstory really of kind of why we're kind of on this journey. And what I want to do is just share some vivid examples of some of the projects that we're working on across the world. And these are projects that we're actually doing right now. So these are live now. In both cases, you can actually go to the community and see for yourself what's actually happening. The first one I want to share is Montreal in Canada. And I see Montreal is actually a movement that was initiated by the Board of Trade in Canada. And it's a movement to create a collective mindset, to restore the confidence in the city and the pride in the city, and to generate economic momentum. These are a couple of billboards that they sort of produced around town. And for those of you who can't speak French, the one on the right says, "An idea that is not shared remains an idea." And the other one is really sort of take action for the future of the city. So the whole initiative was really aimed at the entire city. So anyone that lived or did trade in the city of Montreal was really the sort of target for this whole project. This is a screenshot of one of the ideas actually in Crowdicity, in the Crowdicity platform. And what citizens were encouraged to do was to actually come together and around a few priority issues. And these were things like attracting and retaining talent in the city. So a particular issue they had in Montreal was to actually get people and businesses to actually come into the city, and then once they're in the city to actually retain them. About sort of revitalizing the living environment. So, you know, actually making Montreal a better place for people to live and to take part in. Within a few weeks, we got about 7,500, 8,000 people signed up into the city, into this whole platform. This is literally within 2 weeks. We had 360 projects sort of shared on the platform. We got 15,000 votes, you know, 3,200 comments and collaborations around the ideas. So, you know, momentum was sort of, it hit the ground running. I think people were ready for this whole initiative. What was really cool about what they did was they had the crowdsourcing initiative, and then in November, what they did was they then took the crowdsourcing experience offline. So they actually created an event. They had a day-long brainstorming session. They had over 1,500 citizens from Montreal actually come to an event in Montreal where they actually worked on some of the pledges and projects that they'd captured in the crowdsourcing platform. And they were expecting probably 30 or 40 of these projects to be kind of adopted, to be taken forward. What they actually found was at the end of the day, they had 180 projects that the leaders of the city actually got behind. And these are the projects that the leaders say, I will sponsor this, I will take ownership of this project, and I will work with the people that actually have helped develop this project through the platform to actually take this forward. So now what we're doing is we're feeding these projects back into the platform, and we're doing the crowdsourcing around the sort of specifics of how these projects can actually start to get traction. Another example I just want to share with you is what we're doing in Rio. So we've launched what is effectively a social collaboration platform for the city of Rio. And this was an initiative launched by Mayor Eduardo Perez. And it's a first for any Brazilian city. And really what it's doing, it's trying to consolidate the efforts of what they're doing elsewhere in government. And what they want to do is actually get people in Rio more connected with the creation and discussion of policies within the cities. So what they want to do is they want to open up City Hall so that the citizens have more of a say and more of an influence over what City Hall is actually doing. They call it agora. Agora is the sort of Greek word for like a public space. So back in ancient Greece, citizens used to come together in these public spaces to debate and decide on policies collectively. They're setting up their own agora in Rio, and effectively the internet is their public space. What they're doing effectively, this is a continuous channel, so just reflecting what Jeff is saying, this is always on. This will continue to grow and continue to build. But what they're doing is they're having a new initiative every 3 months, and part of what they're doing during the initiative period is actually deciding on what the next initiative should be. But actually what was pretty cool is that in 2016, as you may know, Rio is actually going to be hosting the Olympic Games. What they wanted people to do, the first challenge, is actually what do you want as the legacy for the city from us hosting these games? So, you know, it's okay having all this great infrastructure, which is great to support the games, but what do you want the legacy for the games to be as we start to go forward? This is probably a little bit too small to see, but I'm very happy if anyone wants to come and see me. I'm very happy to share the slides. They had a whole process, and the great thing about this process is it was transparent. And I think what people could see is that there was a beginning, middle, and an end. And there was an end point, an output, and there was a commitment from on the behalf of the City Hall to actually do something. So this wasn't a shallow or hollow PR exercise. There was actually a real outcome that was going to be driven through this whole process. And effectively how it sort of ends was the mayor of Rio, about 2 days ago in fact, had a live video conference where he announced through an interactive session the 25 initiatives that he is going to be supporting that are going to be taken forward now and adopted by the city of Rio. And I think what was really interesting and the real sort of insight and real learning for us in this whole process is that this relationship between the sort of physical and the virtual world is absolutely critical. Technology and crowdsourcing like this can't exist in isolation. It needs to be augmented by the real world. So the real world gave an opportunity to actually get exposure, to promote the event, to allow the officials to actually go out there and meet people and to be seen to be involved in the whole process. And it also allowed them to take the traditional sort of public forums and amplify them. So you get 200 people turning up to an event, and then what they can do through crowdsourcing and through the technology is amplify those 200 people on the ground to the 2,000 people feeding back in real time through a crowdsourcing platform. So it really democratized the debate, and it actually sort of broadened the whole kind of demographic that was actually involved in the process. Also, I just want to lastly just throw in this. This is something that we worked on last year. So it isn't just governments that we're working with and businesses. We also helped the United Nations produce the first ever crowdsourced official United Nations policy. So it's the first time they'd ever crowdsourced anything. And it's certainly the first time that a crowdsourced document had ever become an official UN declaration. We work with the International Telecommunications Union. This is an organization that's been on for 180 years. They've been submitting declarations to the UN General Assembly for 180 years. They've never once had a document accepted as an official United Nations document until they did this crowdsourcing project. And I think one of the reasons why is because it wasn't just a group of people in a room that were coming up with this policy. It wasn't just 100 or 200 people at an event coming up with this policy. This was a policy that was created by thousands of people that were actually going to be impacted by the outputs of this policy worldwide. And it really was representative of what the people of the world wanted to see in terms of what the member states need to sign up to for the next sort of 30 years around the priorities of information communication technology. That was the theme. So basically, you know, to summarize what I'm sort of saying, it's actually the genie's out the bottle. Technology is here to stay. And it's actually changing the way that citizens and governments actually collaborate. You know, old obstacles of human interaction like geography, language, limited access to information are all starting to fall away because we're just becoming more technology connected. And I think really my message now to governments and to businesses and organizations is, you know, it's a great time to actually start to figure this all out. Nobody has the answers yet. This is the thing. Even the people that are sort of doing this now for the first time, they don't have the answers. They're kind of learning as they go. And they're making the mistakes and they're learning from those mistakes. But I think they've kind of acknowledged the fact that actually this is going to be an important and significant part of how they do their jobs going forward. So, thank you. Thank you for listening.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Nick. And now I give floor to Tanya. Tanya, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Tanya Aitamurto. I live in San Francisco, California, but originally I'm from Finland. And this is actually my first time in Russia, so thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here. It's a historical moment in my life to visit this country. So I'm going to talk today about two projects that I've done with the government of Finland, where we crowdsourced law reform processes. And I'm going to gather a couple of lessons learned that we can hopefully then discuss further in the Q&A session. Is this on? Yeah.
Да, всё.
Yeah, here we go. So, so let's look at the case profile of the first crowdsourced law reform. So that's Finland, next to Russia, a small country in Northern Europe. So the first case that I did with the government of Finland was, and the Committee for the Future in the Finnish Parliament, was law reform of the off-road traffic law. And off-road traffic refers to traffic beyond established roads. So basically in Finland we have a lot of snow, almost most times of the year, especially in Lapland, in northern Finland, where I'm from, just by the Arctic Circle. So we move around a lot on snowmobiles, like in this picture. And in summertime, we move around on ATVs. So we need a law to govern that type of traffic. And the law protects the nature from the harm and damage that the traffic causes. And also it regulates the safety of the traffic. So it regulates how fast you can drive, how old you have to be in order to be riding these devices and all that. So, and then there was there's a debate in Finland going on that that law should be updated because there's much more off-road traffic every year, and the current law dates back to 1995, and it doesn't regulate as well as it should be. So then the Ministry of the Environment at that time, he said, okay, let's try to reform the law, but let's involve the citizens in the law reform process. So let's use crowdsourcing so that we can actually find out better what the needs on the ground are. And that's where I came into the play. So I designed this process, I studied it with my colleagues at Stanford and beyond. And this is how the process looked like. So we had an online platform where the citizens would get more information about the law, the existing law, and the needs to reform it. And anybody could participate online by submitting their idea, how the law should be reformed. And we had created different categories. There were categories about safety, about nature, and all that, so that people could submit ideas under those specific categories. And there were more information about the safety and accidents and all that under each category. And this is how the ideas look like online. You could tag them by keywords and so on. You could vote on them. You could comment on them. You see myself there too. I was following the conversation online and I was moderating it. The participants would ask questions about the law, and then the civil servants in the governments who are experts in off-road traffic law, then they would respond to those questions. And this is how the process looked like. So we had several sequences. In the first phase, we actually asked people to submit or describe the current problems on the ground with the current law. And then we analyzed all that input, and then based on that input, we created the second phase where we asked the citizens then to solve those problems. So we moved from that kind of whining and complaining stage to a more constructive, let's solve this problem together stage. And in the third phase, we had a crowd evaluation where the crowd evaluated the ideas. And then in the fourth phase, which is ongoing, the law writing happens in the government. But what has happened now, of course, so we are nearing parliamentary elections in Finland, so the government, the ministers in the government changed a little bit, and the Ministry of the Environment changed. So I don't know if the new Ministry of the Environment will actually carry on through this process, because she didn't start this one, so she doesn't own it politically. So the political reality hits in here. So a big picture here, so that you understand, because I know the Russian system works differently, just like in every country in the world, so that you know how the Finnish parliamentary system works and how the lawmaking system typically works, is that it's either the government or the parliament who initiates a new law or law reform process, and then there are typically small number of civil servants, 2 or 3 in the government, who actually draft the bill, which is very different from, for instance, the system in the United States. So, and then the civil servants, they set up an expert committee, and they work together with interest groups who try to influence the law, and that's how the bill comes to fruition. And then it goes to the parliament that discusses it and either accepts it or rejects it or wants to have revisions. So it's the parliament who has the final decision-making power over the laws. But then when we introduce crowdsourcing to this lawmaking process, so the crowd, you see that blue button there, so the crowd brings in like an extra data point to the law drafting process. So the crowd doesn't take part in the decision-making process, as you see. And this is a common misunderstanding when we talk about crowdsourcing, is that in democratic processes we think that, oh, the crowd then takes over and makes all these decisions. Not oftentimes. The crowdsourcing works as a method for knowledge search. So then another process that we did this year with the Ministry of Justice in Finland, that was about condominium law, so the law that governs when you own a flat or condo in a big apartment building. So the law governs how the communication should take place in that condo building and all that. And the civil servants in the government wanted to check whether the law is functioning well, because the law was reformed a couple of years ago. So we used crowdsourcing to find out what type of ideas people would submit to actually improve the law. And the result was that the civil servants concluded that the law doesn't need to be reformed, but the current law needs better instructions so that it can be implemented better. So that was the result of crowdsourcing, and so that the government should have a better communication in place about the law that's actually pretty functional as is. So then the lessons learned from these couple of cases that we have done. The first one is that in order to make these processes successful, you have to engage both from bottom up, meaning the lower level civil servants in the process, and also you have to engage the top level politicians to get the buy-in. But if you just have one level, if you have the top ministry saying that, yeah, let's do crowdsourcing, this is going to be great, it's not going to be enough, because the lower level bureaucrats are not excited about the process, and they're going to try to prevent it happening in any stage they can. And then related to that, second lesson learned is that be ready to explain the process and crowdsourcing as a method many times, because this is the typical mistake that people think that, oh, the crowd will decide about how the law will look like. That's scary. That's very scary for the members of the parliament. They don't like anything that takes power from them. The third lesson learned is that have transparency in all the stages of the process. Like, for instance, in the crowdsourced off-road traffic law case, You see this first and second phase. In between, we had analysis phase. Between second and third phase, we had analysis phase, where we took all the ideas, analyzed them, synthesized it, categorized them, and all that. So, and we did it within our research group and with the civil servants. And of course, the question is, were we biased? Were we neutral? Could there have been other categories? How many ideas did we merge together? Did some ideas get lost? So the more transparent you can be about the process, the better buy-in you will get from the crowd. And the last lesson learned is that create sequences to the process. I really like what Nick has done in Brazil. You saw there were at least 6 different stages in the process. So that's great because each stage can bring in new participants, and you want to have as many participants as possible. And also the more sequences you have in the process, the more accessible it is because a new person can join later in the process and they haven't been needing to be part of the process from the day one. But at the same time, the more sequences you have, the more pressure you have to synthesize for synthesizing the content because you have to analyze it and summarize it. So you have to have like modularization, but then at the same time, you have to have moments for synthesis as well. So these are my 4 lessons learned that we are then implementing going forward in these crowdsourced lawmaking processes. And with this, I'm going to conclude my talk, and I welcome all the questions and comments. Thank you.
Таню, спасибо, отдельное спасибо за...
Thank you very much, Tanya. Especially thank you for being in time. You are very good at this. Well, and right now, I ask you again to take these devices for voting. If they turned off already, push the green button to make sure these are working. And now we've put the second question on voting. And the question is, does it make sense to perform crowdsourcing without the guarantee of ideas being realized? And here we have only 2 possible answers, yes or no. If yes, then push 1. If no, then push 2. So does it make sense to perform crowdsourcing without the guarantee of ideas being realized? Couple of seconds to calculate the stats. You see, we're doing that in real time. Yeah, we have 101%. Okay, we're gonna ask this the tech staff. How will you explain that? I see you surprised. All right, 63 plus 38. Well, this is a little bit too much. Though obviously the answer is clear. I have a question to Nick. Your platform is the one that gives an opportunity to speak out, but you don't guarantee that the ideas of people will be realized. How willing are people to be involved in these problems, knowing that there's going to be no realization, probably?
There we are. Okay. Technology. I think, there's sort of 2 ways of looking at this. No, there's no guarantees that, if you share an idea on the platform, that your idea is actually going to get adopted. That's fair enough. A bit louder. Yeah. Okay. So I take this out because I'm getting a distorted view of my volume in my ear. So yeah. So as a participant, there's certainly no guarantees that by sharing an idea that your idea is going to get adopted. That's certainly true. But I think it's important that any crowdsourcing process that actually takes place, there needs to be some sort of commitment from the organization, the business, or the party running it, that they're actually going to commit to do something with the outputs. Because if that doesn't exist, it's going to be very difficult to go back the next time and the next time and the next time and keep on asking, because people will just sort of not participate anymore, and you know, the engagement will drop off because they think, well, what's the point? You know, nothing ever comes of it. So I think, you know, I think, you know, you're right. Not every idea is going to get realized. That's a reality. But I also think it's tremendously important that if you enter into any of these initiatives, that you have a mechanism in place to listen and to feed back, and if appropriate, act on the process. I think that's critical.
And actually, so what we found out in the Finnish process, we interviewed the participants. They are very realistic about their possibility to influence on the outcome. Like, they don't think that anybody's one idea will be implemented to the law as is, but they understand that there are thousands of other participants, and the actual result, the law, will be a compromise of many different voices and opinions.
Спасибо. И сейчас я представляю следующего спикера.
Thank you very much. And now I introduce the next speaker, Natalia Klimova, head of the Moscow Center Open Government. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the floor. And I would like especially thank our foreign colleagues to share their experience. And thank you, Chair, for crowdsourcing term itself. For some people, this is a new word. For us, it's something familiar already. And I wonder if this new notion is really something new for us, if it represents something new. I don't know, really, but Aristotle said that states is comprised from different stories. And if the emperor eats much better than if the emperor with its party eats much better than one poor person, and exactly in the same way, the crowd has a better opinion than one separate person. And I believe this describes crowdsourcing very good. We opened a constant crowdsourcing platform for Moscow administration, Moscow city government projects. Why did we actually implement this project? What was the goal of that, and what do we expect from that? This is what I tried to tell you today. Crowdsourcing for us is not just a fashionable word. It's a new method of governmental decision-making, decisions that do take into consideration people's opinion. One of the priorities of Moscow government is the program that is called Open Moscow. Within this program, we created a certain number of online instruments that aim to provide the feedback from the citizens. One of the projects is our city portal. It's quite similar to See Click Fix, the one that Jeff was talking about, but we went even further. He really showed us quite curious, interesting figures, about 300,000 users, you know, during 6 years or something like that. Now we have more than 400 people using it during after 3 years. You can go at the portal, your website is over there at the display, and tomorrow I invite you to our roundtable that will be about this very portal. You can get more details about that. We have another instrument which is called Active Citizen that we recently talked about on another roundtable, where the citizens can take part in decision making. For us, crowdsourcing is a way of, you know, pre-discuss with citizens some issues of urban development. Our first pilot project happened in February of this year that aimed to improve the portal Our City. As the portal was quite known already by that time among the people, we suggested some ways to improving this. We asked them what functionality we have to add, what new topics they would like to discuss, what new, public control instruments they can imagine. And, well, you know, the project was really very interesting, and people were really interested in that. Obviously, At the very beginning, those were only users of the portal who participated in that survey. Many, like 9.5 thousand people participated and will sign in for participate in that project. We got more than 9,000 ideas about different, questions that we put there on the portal. Of course, many of them were similar. But this is more about the fact that people are concerned about the similar things, and it's about the fact that some solutions, they really require more of our attention. Of course, this is for... Of course, this is for experts, because as a colleague of ours, they say that not a single idea should be, left over. We have to pay attention to everything, and this is why we have experts participating in every problem solving. From Moscow Center Open Government, the people who work with this portal, they were reading these 9,000 ideas to choose unique, be them really similar, but the ones that are really important. We took to work, about 300 of them to work with, and we realized, implemented and solved about 90% of all the issues and problems. There were a couple of other projects. The one was about the new routing system of the city, and the second one of improving the new web public service center. I won't be talking a lot about this. At our stand on the show, you can see all the figures about the project, but generally about the first new route city network project involved about 14,000 people, and we got about, or rather in both of them, there were about 14,000 participants, and we got more than 5,000 ideas about different ways of road construction. We got where we need to add some new lines, new night routes, for example. We got all the people ideas about how they see the road mapping here, and about the web platform for state services. We got all the understanding of what do people think of that, and we implemented all the suggestions that we got, well, the ones that made sense, actually. Why do we think this is important and good for people, for citizens? Why people are so involved in this? Well, obviously, they get directly involved in decision-making. Governmental level decision-making. This is the opportunity to be in the very center, in the very core of everything that is happening, because all the projects that go for a discussion, these are Moscow government projects, new legislative acts that are being developed. For many people, this is very important to, as a way of self-realization. This improves their self-confidence, and they feel needed and they feel important. What did we notice? We learned that at the very beginning is unorganized crowd. It's something that is very difficult to manage. Different people who come there with their own thoughts, their own worries and concerns, and they always start with the same thing. Please find a Russian equivalent to the words facilitate and crowdsourcing, because don't bother us with some foreign words. We couldn't really, substitute them with something, but of course there are some definitions that naturally flow into Russian language, and we forget about the fact that they were at some point foreign. But then, after people start working on the project, they start forming the community or communities depending on their opinions that are similar. And what is the most interesting, we implemented 3 projects, and the fourth is coming. There is a group of active participants already. These are people who participate always. These are the ones who are ready to express their opinions all the time, every time. These are people waiting for new projects. And for them, this is kind of, additional opportunity to self-realization, to be active in their lives. there is a question about why are you motivated? Why do you want to participate in the service? And people always answering that I care about my city. These are, you know, those crazy, it's not very big, but there is a group of those crazy people who are really sitting late at night, generating some ideas. We get some responses at 5 a.m. And we see how interested people are in this project. And thanks to that, we created a constant platform, and we were asked to do so by the major. The platform, especially for constant realization of such crowdsourcing programs. The last one was about the Moscow standard for child vacations. There were more than 7,000 participants registered for that platform, and after like 4 days, we got more than 5,000 ideas after that first stage. And it's quite fun that the participants are very different, you know. In our city, half of them were men and half of them were women. But when we were talking about, you know, the Moscow standard of children's vacation, on how children have to spend their free time, those are women, of course, mothers that are mostly interested for some reason, I don't know, in their child leisure time. There was 70% of women. They were really curious about everything happening. They were gladly remembering their childhood, their, you know, going out, I'm sorry we haven't translated that into English. But you see the comments. It's like people were writing, I barely have time to use the computer during the day. At 10 p.m., I put my children and my husband to sleep, and only then I have a time to, you know, to go on internet. I was sitting up to 4 p.m. to make my contribution in the project. Another one, probably a person is a dentist or something, and she's writing, sorry, I was working at that moment. I'm an assistant of a dentist in OP, and I couldn't really leave the patient there. So we see that people are involved, people are interested, and we believe that this is a crucial thing here. And we see that this interest is not about money at all. And I do agree with Jeff, who told that the financial motivation is the least important thing in this crowdsourcing project. People are not coming there for some financial benefits. Obviously, they get some bonuses at the end of the project. They get some, I don't know, awards, some tickets to museums, some meetings with city administration. For example, the winners of our city portal, they went to a meeting with the mayor of Moscow, and I think there was a bigger bonus for them that some money could have been. I think that moral satisfaction is another important thing. This moral satisfaction is closely linked to the trust that they start to feel towards the project. I'm a little bit, you know, surprised with the results of the voting. People want to believe that their ideas are not put, you know, into the trash bin immediately. They are all read, they are all seen, and there are experts 24/7 reading these ideas, and they immediately react to these ideas, and people see that, and people start trusting these projects. There is a guarantee of their realization at some point still. And well, as a conclusion, after these 3 projects, we have something to show people. We actually are ready to report. We solved more than 40 new problem topics on the portal. We really created new voluntarily movement, new city. We really almost realized all the potential of the portal. We're not sitting there thinking, what else shall we do? We need to invent, you know, to attract attention to people. We already have something to work on for a year, probably. We opened about 6 new bus routes. We implemented new Moscow standard of public services. And the last one that was about the standard of summer vacation for children. If I'm not mistaken, about 170 ideas were selected by experts, and those will be included in the standard for, for this children vacation time. Well, and really to conclude, I would like to just say that despite some obvious limitations of, you know, of number of participants on the projects that are related to experts' work, obviously, it's impossible to read, that many issues, like physically impossible. And unfortunately, not always participants stay till the very end. This is also obvious. Not all people have a possibility, to forget about their families and jobs and spend all of their time on the projects. But at every project, we have a function of the guest, and every citizen that is not the participant of the project itself can have an opportunity to follow the project, follow the realization of it, and this is Open Moscow as we see it. Please welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. And I want to give floor just for 1 second to Anastasia Rakova. Where is the mic? Just a couple of words to add up here. I was surprised by the results of the poll, where the majority believe that the project should not be implemented. Once again, that's not the government that initiated the project. When we created the platform, we think it's not permissible for us not to implement the project that the audience voted for, the citizens voted for. That's the responsibility we take. And we must implement those projects. Otherwise, there is no trust from the audience, from the real people. That's why we're carefully planning the projects and we're carefully moderating it throughout. Thank you. And finally, I give floor to our final speaker, Alexander Oslon, President of the Public Opinion Foundation. Thank you. I thank the organizers of this event for the opportunity to speak here, as well as to the participants who are interestingly following the topics. I have my own ideas about crowdsourcing, and I will present it to you briefly. I agree with Jeff saying that crowdsourcing is the word that appeared in Russia 3 years ago only. That was Sberbank Russian Bank conference, and we can even specify the date. That was 11 November 2011. President Putin used this word at the conference, and since that, people have been repeating it over and over again. Although before, professionals, of course, had known that. In my experience, we still have a vague understanding of this notion. This word is associated with chaos, with crowd and noise. It's like many people are doing something which is not quite clear. Finally, the scope of understanding is very broad. There are many stakeholders involved, too many. When we compare this word with outsourcing, with the notion of outsourcing, the notion that appeared much earlier, outsourcing is clear. We source people from outer sources, from outer places. But I think it's a normal thing. At first, the notion, the understanding is vague, but in the course of time, we get a better idea of this notion. Here, we should metaphorically understand the word crowd. The different metaphors of crowd correlate to different ideas, notions. Crowd is, on the one hand, a mass of people, the source of messages, complaints, evaluations, and opinions. Crowd is also a cloud, people involved in individual specific decision-making. There are many resources, many platforms all over the world where people are focused on specific tasks, on specific projects, and they earn money through solving micro tasks. For example, Google and Yandex use this tool to evaluate the efficiency of search engines. So microtasks and cloud technologies are brightly used for these purposes. Finally, the big number of people, vast number of people, that's how we generate best ideas and solutions. We use this function of crowd to mine the data and figure out the best solutions. And finally, crowd is a group. It's a group of people involved in a project, in creation of something. It can be any project, construction of a plane, a bridge, a ship. The project involves numerous stages, and as soon as people initiated the project, it's difficult for the outsiders to join the process because the team has been involved in the project for a while already. Here at this forum, I want to come up with one more metaphor. The metaphor of a city which is the environment for citizens. That's the environment where they live, where they work. They wake up early in the morning and go to their working places, to factories, to offices. They have their own worries, they have own purposes to achieve something, to get new status, to multiply their financial resources, to find new friends, to collaborate, to get recognition. Natalia talked about Aristotle. People also collaborate to make fun, to unfold their personalities, to enjoy themselves. So city, it's a multifaceted environment, and this nature of city is self-evident. So I suggest to use a metaphor of a city as one suitable for crowdsourcing. To be more specific, I want to tell and apply this notion to CrowdSpace. That's the platform where we try to take use of those metaphors. We have a number of projects ongoing there. It serves many purposes. Originally, people working on the project, when the project is over, they're not needed anymore. But it's a fact that people want to stay, they want to remain, and they want to continue working on what they were successful at. And we should take advantage of those people. So we give them the opportunity to participate in similar projects. Second purpose, people want to collaborate. Sometimes they spread gossips, they discuss their bosses, they criticize them, and we cannot prevent people from doing it because it's natural. That's in the nature of a human being. Finally, we have employers. These are our ultimate customers, and they have their own tasks and purposes our users can serve for. So the ultimate purpose of CrowdSpace is to provide the environment for people to stay there and feel at ease. Those people who want to come and stay there, these are very specific people. We call them project people. Who are they? These are people who like being part of their society, feel their commitment and their engagement. These are volunteer sort of people who have active civil position, who are communicative, open-minded, and friendly. But it's not just a mere Facebook chat. It's not like the idle conversation between friends. They not just communicate, they manage to work and achieve their goals at the same time. Some people want to work individually, some people want to work together to achieve certain results. But these people, project people, prefer to make free choices, to be free in their choices in terms of activities they take up. So they are prone to variety, they like variety a lot. And finally, they are highly motivated for success. They want to achieve success and be successful in their life. It's sort of fashion we are talking about. Crowdsourcing is a fashion, but it's a good one because it engages people. It brings people together to participate on socially important projects. At the same time, it's important to be able to integrate and transfer joint project successes into what we call personal capital, personal achievement. Here we talk about different talents, about different expertise and experience, where people can take advantage of this expertise and experience. Crowdspace is a pilot platform. It has been running for a year already. We checked it out in the Moscow region and realized that it's ultimately important to have multiple projects within this single environment, including the project aimed at individuals. I have half a minute to finish my talk. There is an alarm ringing in my tablet. So once again, when it comes to the heads of the city, the ideas have to be implemented. And decision makers should have a clear understanding that certain ideas are bad, but many of them must be implemented to provide the trust. Just to give you the example, we have park knowledge projects. That's how I call it. There are people who want to share information, and there are people who want to get the information. And if there are no listeners, then it makes no sense to tell the stories. And on the other hand, if there are many listeners, then the person is successful. The person is in demand. That's one of the fundamentals of the Crowdspace project. Within this metaphor, we can also develop the notion of network urbanism, the sociology of project people, and we all know that Public Opinion Foundation deals with project people, with sociology above all. That's the new and the promising project. So far, we don't have any projects in Crowdspace. We're just beginning. Right now, you are evidencing, you are the witnesses of this newborn project. Thank you for this metaphor, for this wonderful idea at the end of the speech. And here we have our first row speakers, Anastasia Rakova, the deputy mayor, Asan Nikolaev from Yakutsk government, Director General of Moscow Trans, Mr. Mikhailov, Deputy Head of Department of Culture, Mr. Filipov, and Vitalogia Company Director, Mr. Vitukov. If you have any questions to our speakers, experts, don't hesitate to ask them. Boris Vishenkov from St. Petersburg. I just want to add some aspects of interaction and maybe change a mood, this positive mood we have among the speakers. I want to come up with my judgment. Your question, please. No, I have a judgment, and I want to remind you Winston Churchill's word. He said that if you manage something based upon public opinion, it's like to drive a car looking at the rear view mirror. The basic idea is that we cannot take any managerial decisions based on crowdsourcing. It's just impossible. That's the first remark. The second remark, the Western Hemisphere people talking about crowdsourcing, they keep in mind completely different notions. Our English-speaking guests have a clear vision of democracy, and they have great experience of democracy tools, and crowdsourcing is just one tiny aspect of democracy. In Russia, we have completely different picture. Our government is talking about crowdsourcing because it's sort of virtual resemblance of public protests of 2011 brought to the virtual realities. Yes, there was no question, but still we can comment on it.
If I can comment that quickly, the colleague from St. Petersburg, thanks a lot for your comments. So just a quick notion on the metaphor of looking at the rear mirror when you're driving. Well, that's sometimes useful too. So when we use the term crowdsourcing, for instance, in connection in lawmaking process, so the cases that I presented, for instance, so crowdsourcing wasn't a way to find out the public opinion. So there are other methods, much better methods to find out what people think about, for instance, whether Finland should reform social security law or not. And that's a situation where we would use a method like for surveys, for polling for public opinion, when you look for a representative sample of the public so that you can actually find really good quantitative results. But crowdsourcing, the way that we have used it in these presentations today, it's a method for knowledge search, find out information that might be helpful when you shape a better policy. For instance, what our colleagues presented that has been done here in the city of Moscow, it sounds like crowdsourcing functioned as a method to find out local information, where the streets should be improved or how different policies should be shaped and where different actions should be taken place. So if the city of Moscow would have wanted to ask the public opinion, they would have measured it by using a poll, and that's a totally different method. So I just wanted to make it clear because this often comes up when we talk about crowdsourcing.
I agree. I mean, I don't think, I think there is value to governance, to taking public opinion into account. But then I would say that because that's the culture I'm from. But that's not crowdsourcing. I think to sort of even draw the distinction further, one of my favorite companies that I didn't get to talk about is called Strava. And if you're an athlete, your knowledge of Strava is, oh wow, this is a great app I can put on my smartphone, and it will connect me to other athletes, and it will track my data, where I run, how fast I run, all of these things that are useful to me, and I get it for free. That's because Strava is anonymizing that data. They make it anonymous, so, and then they sell it back to cities so that cities can see, oh, this is the most popular jogging route. This is where people are not, we put a bike lane here, but no one's using it because it's really dangerous. I mean, these are things that a city manager, a single urban planner could never figure out on their own. I mean, this is immensely valuable data. Like, I would actually say, from a city manager's perspective, revolutionary data that really has nothing to do with democracy. It has to do with efficient governance. I mean, it doesn't matter what form of government you have to whether or not you want your bike lanes to work. I mean, everyone wants their citizens to be happy and healthy, and that's all that this is about. It's just about efficiency.
Спасибо.
Я хотела бы еще немножко дополнить.
Анастасия
Конечно,
Владимировна, прошу, дополните.
все новое воспринимается всегда тяжело.
Just to add, of course, we always have troubles with implementing new things, but the result is self-evident. We have 4 new bus routes. We have 40 new topics on our portal. We talk about effective tools against minor accidents with ice and other winter conditions. I think that we can evaluate this tool effectively after the experience of its use in a year or so.
Со звуком такой отвратительный.
Sergei Simonov, I'm the member of the population who volunteers actively in crowdsourcing projects. Just to add from my own, and I have a question, and my question is, the active population of Moscow, active citizens of Moscow, who join every project, these people expect new ideas from the government. And we even think of establishing our own community of active citizens, of active members of civil society, so that we can have our platform to communicate and come together. Will we have this platform or not? Natalia, the question to you. Sergei, thank you for the question. I don't think that we have to do that specifically. You already have this community, and we have platform for that. Believe me, it's not going to be boring next year. We're going to have multiple projects, and many of them will be running in parallel. One more question. My question to Natalia. I'm also an active participant of crowdsourcing projects. There are many projects, the effectiveness of them varies. We have our city platform, but Moscow is a huge city, it's immense, megapolis, especially taking account the new Moscow, and the information is not always updated, it's not always up to date. So our suggestion was to use crowdsourcing technology to update information effectively so that citizens have up-to-date information and utmost modern services, because there are certain problems, because the data is just outdated.
Мы затронули тему.
We touched upon a topic which is more about crowdsourcing project, our city, because this is an instrument to analyze the complaints from the public, complaints about different stuff. And yes, we do have problems with databases, and we have it not only in Russia, in Moscow. This is all over the country and in regions. And in some regions, well, they don't have any databases at all. And well, after 3 years of the portal, if we compare the beginning database with the one that we have now, this is just comparing black and white. This was a huge breakthrough, you know, to gather all the data existing. For those of you who don't know quite well about this instrument, I would say just, you know, to open up this information on the portal, we added up 8 databases of different executive power executive power institutions, and the information that is there on the portal is always renewed, you know, it's always very up to date. And well, it was complicated. Unfortunately, not every time that we start to discuss something, we need the data, the information that we actually need, to discuss something. And we do research in that case. If someone is complaining about the bad road, we have to know if that road actually exists and where it exists. Speaking about the roadmap, this initiative is quite good one. We were considering it as the potential for the topics for crowdsourcing projects, and for next year at crowdmos.ru platform, we will not only post there the project that is going to be initiated within a month, but we will post there the whole list on, 3 or 4 different spheres or fields, and the roadmap initiative was there as well. I hope we'll start. All right, there was a madam here. It does work, thank you. My name is Natalia. I'm from Foundation About Children. Mostly your examples were about city needing information and people bring information to the city. We are a charitable foundation and we work with quite a small group of people, target audience, and we need some information, we need some data from the government, Is there any mechanism that really gives us an opportunity to cooperate with you, with Foundation? We are willing to work at any platforms. You have a wider informational coverage, you have bigger resources, and these are, this is the data that is only, works with very small. Is this a commercial offer or what? No, it's not commercial offer. We are a charitable foundation. No, my question is that what mechanisms exist for a charitable organization or a certain organization for crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, I'm sorry. It does work, right? Well, colleagues of ours were just saying it works. Probably there is a misunderstanding. If you have some initiative that you would like to be supported by other people, and that you would like it to be noticed, seen by the administration, please go online, and if people support you, will work with your idea. No, I have a question. All right. You sat, for the front row for the session. I see that you have very good question. What share of Moscow citizens or of Russia citizens have this access to use this online space, this virtual space? Let me just correct you because we're talking about Moscow. All right, the question was, what's the share of people living in Moscow and in Russia that has an access to internet? So you get the information not through internet but through offline survey, and on the website of public opinion you have statistics from 2002. The monthly people that are using the internet on that year was about 10% of people. Right now it's about 60% of people that use internet. In Moscow it's much higher. Right, I would like to attract attention of our Western colleagues, and I have a very professional issue. I represent the Vito Logging Company, on the base of which we create the projects of Sberbank, the one that you mentioned that happened 3 years ago. Quite often in Russia, open innovations are the synonym for crowdsourcing, but we long ago noticed that within these projects we rarely have some genius informational solutions. Then there is a question. Shall we refuse, shall we stop using these open innovations together with crowdsourcing? Or there are some mechanisms that will help us to improve the KPI of the crowd, for them to generate some genius, or at least close to genius ideas. Thank you.
I'll feel bad. I mean, so when I wrote my crowdsourcing book, you know, I had a rule, like an axiom, you know, like like a rule, like something that's always true, and it's called Sturgeon's axiom. Sturgeon was a science fiction writer, and he was once asked, why is 90% of science fiction novels really, well, it's a profane word, really bad, really terrible? And he said, you know what, 90% of everything is crap, is terrible. And so that's actually, in a lot of Western crowdsourcing companies, that's taken very seriously. The assumption is that at the very get-go, you're going to have to filter out almost everything is going to be, you know, if you open up comments on a Western newspaper, you know, 90% of the comments are going to be about like pornography and like racism and hate speech. I mean, stuff that is just like, it's 13-year-olds writing ridiculous things because they're the ones who are online at 1 a.m. So, but I do think that in many examples, if not most, that the genius is actually there. It's a question of filtering out for it. You know, the preponderance, the majority of submissions, of contributions are going to be of very low quality. That's across the board. That's always the case. And so it's a matter of finding the needle in the haystack. I was surprised to hear that, you know, that Moscow is having its experts look at all 9,000 suggestions, because I was thinking to myself, really? Because I bet 8,000 of them are terrible. And that seems like, and one thing that's often used in crowdsourcing is the crowd filters its own. If there's something that's obviously like, you know, Muscovites should use air balloons because of the bad traffic, well, you know, you don't need an expert to say that's probably a bad idea. You can have another member of the crowd vote that down, so the expert never even has to see it and spend their time on it.
Да, прошу, есть что добавить.
Yeah, I agree. And then also, you know, we sort of find that, you know, it all sort of, you've got to rewind it back, you know. So the thing that we sort of say that, you know, one of the worst things that you can do is when you do something like this is just to go, any ideas, you know, because the thing is that people will tell you their ideas, but, you know, half the time you don't want to sort of listen to, you know, what people have got to say, or at very least, you know, there's no mechanism or no imperative for you as an organization to actually do anything with any of these ideas, because they don't sort of align to anything you're doing. I think the key thing is that you really have got to sort of, you know, get the problem right or get the question right in the first place. You know, you've got to ask the right questions to get the right responses. And, you know, a lot of the work that we do, not just with governments, but with big organizations as well, is really about defining that problem, defining the question at the outset, that actually sets up the whole kind of crowdsourcing process to actually get the responses that you need that actually you can do something with. And that's a skill in itself, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
And also what's very important to remember here is that oftentimes these ideas or pieces of information that the crowd submits online, it's just like raw material that also the experts can build on to shape the actual policy, or then to take the measures, for instance, to improving roads and such. But then there is a problem with lack of human resources, because if you have 9,000 ideas and all of those are read by experts, so after they've done all that reading, they're not going to start brainstorming about how can we improve these best ideas to be even more, like even better. Like for instance, that idea that Jeff threw in about air balloons alleviating the traffic problems in Moscow. Maybe, you know, there would be something with drones, like if there was more use of drones in local deliveries, for instance, there might be less traffic. But we never find out, because we see the, you know, the one-sentence idea online on these crowdsourcing platforms, and we think, oh, that's a crazy idea, when we don't have the time to think about it more. So I think we should, and we are moving in our research at Stanford, moving forward to the next stage in these crowdsourcing efforts, that it's not only about submitting one idea or a couple of sentences, but we could actually brainstorm together to improve the ideas then for the next stage.
Да, только коротко, пожалуйста.
Okay, just a short one. Just an interesting statistic. One of the things that we found when we sort of run some of these projects is, when you've got a problem that you want a kind of a solution to, that typically the 70% of the stuff you get back are not new. It's actually stuff that people have already got done. They've already started. They've already got maybe half the solution to the problem, that they're looking for a partner to help them to sort of with the other half of the solution. So it's very rare that people actually go running off to the end of their gardens and their garden shed and think, I'm going to crack this. Typically, you've got, the answers out there. And I guess what crowdsourcing does, it just gives you a bigger pool to fish in. It's a more chance of actually finding those solutions.
Спасибо. Друзья, к сожалению, мы очень...
Thank you very much, dear friends. Unfortunately, we are very limited in time. If you have some question, if you would like to learn more about crowdsourcing, please come to Jeff lecture. It will happen in this building in Hall A at 9 p.m. And I would like to thank the speakers and all the people present here at this session. Thank you very much. See you soon.